Just before we do get going, I just want to, in the spirit of reconciliation, acknowledge as traditional custodians of the land that we stand on. I stand on the Yorta land. It shares the water of the Goulburn and the Murray. And we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you can, keep your microphones off, and it is being recorded, as you heard the ding, so just be aware that we are recording the sessions. George and I are just going to give you a bit of information about the current state of play, where we are at with WIOA, and we'll have a chat facility that if you wanted to, you get a question or you want a comment that you want to make, by all means put it in there, because it'll be something that we will review, obviously, after today. And at the end of our little state of play conversation, we'll provide the floor to you to ask us any questions, make comments. One of the real reasons, apart from our Queensland conference, obviously, that was in June, that I couldn't get to because we were in lockdown, George was able to attend, but we haven't seen everybody for 2 years. And it really, we sort of feel for you, and I'm sure hopefully you feel for us. And it's just the reason for having the conversation is that normally at a conference, we actually get around and have casual conversations and seek ideas and opportunities and have the conversations, but we just have been void of having that potential over the last 2 years. In 2021, obviously where we are now, as I mentioned briefly, we did execute a conference in Toowoomba. George and Marilyn, his wife, were in Queensland, fortunately for other WIOA work, and were able to, with the assistance of our Queensland Advisory Committee, execute a conference. With COVID-19, obviously for all our other events, they're greyed out because obviously they haven't occurred, and we've just recently postponed our Victorian conference, which has triggered part of today's conversation. The decision-making process, obviously, that WIOA is considering as we're going, and it's probably native to your business, is looking at state government advice, following the road maps where they exist. And where we have been able to, the Queensland one, we did ensure that we have good COVID-safe plans registered with the Queensland Government. Department of Health actually came to Queensland, did an analysis to check what we were doing was adhering to what we said our plan was going to do. So we were using contact tracing, scanning, QR codes, all those sorts of things. The other part of our decision making is the attendance appetite. So a lot of the stakeholders, obviously the exhibitors, yourselves, are pretty keen and would have historically attended WIOA events and see them as being value. So that is one part of it. But there's also the businesses themselves who would send potential delegates and/or visitors to the event. And we know that in some instances, some of those have they've got different levels of appetite, like every other business does. They all make up their own regulations in relation to what people can or cannot do. We're also conscious of other events, and the postponement of Victoria's conference has meant that it has a snowball effect, that it is requiring us to then sort of readdress what we had initially planned in 2022. Like you all, we are the catchwords of being resilient and ready to change. All those sort of things is exactly where WIOA is. So our plan now, obviously the Victorian postponement, is now we've moved that sort of to Bendigo in the 2nd and 3rd of March next year. So the event that was going to be September, then November, is now March. We have looked at penciled in an alternate date in October in case Victoria is still where we are sort of today. The 4 metres per person's rule doesn't enable us to feed people at a conference. It really does need to get down to the 2 metres per person to enable us to actually host an effective event. That is where we're watching the roadmaps, and that is helping us on the decision making. And we really, the timing of all of this is reliant on the roadmaps of the various state governments. Tamworth, clearly we had actually done an initial plan to have that in March. However, moving Victoria to March would mean it just wouldn't be able to occur. So we're sort of looking at pushing that to, and we've had conversation with venues and other suppliers, which all impact that when can we have these events. We've made sure that they're not in school holidays, no public holidays in New South Wales during that week. All those things are all part of that decision-making matrix. The Queensland one, we have got a couple of dates penciled in Logan, and we are working with the Sunshine Coast. Hopefully by the end of next week, have made an absolute call in which facility is available. South Australia, we've got some dates penciled in. We're sort of thinking that Murray Bridge might be okay as the venue again. It's a much smaller event. It was, I think we had 30 exhibitors there, but with a COVID plan, it may be reduced and it may be looking at moving to another facility.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about 2023 as well. Yeah, we're looking at our program for really 2023 onwards, and we did mention the Queensland event having a multitude of dates. One of the issues that we've got is that we're worried about when we can actually obtain some of the venues, and if we hold the Queensland event in 2022 after the 30th of June, then we hit the problem. We've got a tentative booking at the moment with the facility on the Sunshine Coast, as Craig said, for the first week of June 2023. And that would then put two conferences into the same financial year, which would cause some serious grief for the water sector up in Queensland. So the other thing we have done is, from a WIOA board point of view, we've had a look at when, if we had a totally greenfield situation, when might we want to look at running some of these events? As Craig mentioned, we have got issues around Easter, public holidays like Anzac Day and things like that. When you do get into that sort of March, April period, it may not be able to be a set date year in, year out. Like we've always had the Bendigo conference in the first week of September for as long as I've been involved with WIOA, which is about 30 years. And there's no real reason for that other than it's just been the date. But we're thinking going forward that we need to work on a program that gives us the most opportunity to actually be able to get the four events across the line through the course of the year. We are looking at doing the Victorian one in that March-April period, and then looking at Queensland in the June, July, August period. And again, whether we move it into the second half of the year. We've talked to Queensland Water, we've talked to a bunch of other stakeholders, and the suggestion is, and I should say, we've also spoken to our exhibitors who don't like it moving later in that June period because of the busyness around end of financial year and trying to finish off projects and jobs and everything else. So we are looking at, could we move it into that July and August period? And then it puts us, South Australia, we're looking at September each year, and again, New South Wales moving to that late October period each year. So Craig's kind of mentioned in the start that, we haven't been able to run very much. We've been able to, probably shouldn't use the word pivot, everybody uses pivot, but we've certainly been able to go out. Well, we have managed our organisation quite well for a number of years, so we did have some cash reserves to fall back on. And, we've fortunately been able to trade our way through to where we are. We certainly are well and truly financially viable until mid-2022, but if we keep getting conference cancelled, and I think to put the things into perspective, in 2019 or immediately before COVID sort of hit, WIOA made about 80% of our total income came from conferences and events. So that's a pretty major hit for any organisation to literally lose about 80% of your income in one go. And we've been able to diversify into a whole bunch of other projects, and Craig's flicked a couple of them onto the screen there around Queensland and New South Wales with some training work that we're doing, and facilitating some work with the New Zealand water reform at the moment. And then a number of our exhibitors on the line would recall that we ran virtual water in 2020, which was really, in the absence of anything else, at least it was one way we were able to connect with our exhibitors and our members. So we're pretty excited that we've made it this far, and we are desperate to get back to the conferences and get back to face-to-face events and everything else. We have unfortunately just had to let one of our staff members go, one of our admin team. We just haven't got the work for them anymore because we've moved the conference off into 2022, and there's just not the workload here right at the minute. It's a real shame, but hopefully that'll go back to where we were. And one of the other things we do need to look at is, if there is no such thing as face-to-face events, then our WIOA's model will have to change quite considerably. So we are looking at what are some of the alternatives to take that really strong reliance away from the events, full stop. And we hope that we might be able to investigate or just certainly discuss some of those things with our corporate supporters today. So some of the opportunities that we've looked at, we did want to get some feedback from you as well about our proposed event schedule. So does it look okay? Are there any glaring issues around either 2022 or 2023 that you can actually see? And, you know, as Craig noted, we are aware of the fact that the Trenchless Technology Conference in Sydney is on the week after our proposed conference in Bendigo because of the moved dates. We also know that, you know, the going through the month of April in 2022, there's literally only 1 week that we could run our event, because from the second week onwards, we've got 3 4-day weeks in a row. You've got Easter in the middle, and then Anzac Day, which is on the Monday in the last week. So, and that put a bit of pressure on doing anything, you know, through April or into May. And then we've got Ozwater in Brisbane on the 10th, 11th and 12th of May. So we had to try and fit in around that as well. The other thing that we did want to talk about briefly, and we're looking for some ideas from our corporate members, is there other ways that we could actually support our corporate members in helping you to achieve your business goals? So obviously we've got a business goal of staying afloat and being that conduit between the corporate members and the individual members and all of our other stakeholders. But we're also wanting to get some feedback from you about it. Are there any things that you could think of that we're not currently doing that we might be able to bring into the mix? And if you looked at how we're supporting our exhibitors, just our corporate members at the moment, we've got exhibitions, we've got discounted access into the various conferences, we've got the sponsorship opportunities. We've introduced in 2020 some advertising opportunities into Operator, and we've always had the advertising available in the waterworks. But basically that pays for the production of the document and its distribution. At WIOA doesn't physically make any money at all out of waterworks each year. All of that money just goes to the production costs. So we were looking at, you know, at potential new initiatives, and really anything is on the table. Any ideas are on the table. As it says, nothing's off limits. We have been approached about the potential to run 2 Bendigos, and I suppose what prompted that discussion, in 2022. And one of the things that prompted that discussion was around the, interestingly, watching the 2021 or the 2020 Tokyo Olympics in the middle of 2021. So there was a thought process that, you know, though it is a couple of months into 2022 when we would look at running Bendigo, would we be able to just say the first one's the kind of the pseudo 2021 version, and then run it again later in the year in that October slot? And the October slot we've got is the only one that the venue is actually available for as well. So that was the week of the 10th of October. So there was an idea there. We did raise this potential with some of the water business MDs in a recent meeting, and just asked them the question about what would they think about it and would they send delegates. And the response that we got was pretty positive, because they were saying that because the 2 events would be in totally different financial years, then they would still have budgets to be able to send people. So they would actually support, or certainly the ones we spoke to would support sending, you know, people to 2 conferences in 2022 if that's the way we ended up going forward. What it does do, though, is it certainly, if we did decide to do that, it would mean that we'd have to keep the Bendigo conference in that sort of October period next year, because we wouldn't be able to bring it forward to March, which is our intention for 2023, because then we'd end up with 3 conferences within 12 months. And I'm pretty certain that in its own wouldn't be sustainable or totally supported by everybody. So then just some other ideas that Craig and I have been talking about around, can we actually come up with some different models around sponsorship or support of WIOA? What can we do? Can we build a bigger level of sponsorship in, which we see some other organisations actually do quite regularly, and maybe add some other activities like pay-per-view webinars or hosted events or web advertising, things like that. So, there are opportunities there that we haven't tapped into, mainly because we have been, pretty well concentrating on the income from the conferences for literally the last 30 odd years. And we're really just trying to make sure that we investigate everything that we can and try and work on a business model going forward that's less reliant on the conferences, full stop.
I do have a question here from Paul, who's asking about running educational sessions pre-arranged, promoted at a conference. The answer to that, Paul, is nothing is off limits. It's still relying on a face-to-face event, though, if it is at conference, which historically over the last 2 years has been our biggest problem. But there is no reason why we can't. We were talking to Water RA, and we're going to actually conduct a session on the Tuesday on Colossus and the COVID situation from their perspective, and that was, they were sponsoring it, and we would have promoted it in that sort of light. There is no reason why we couldn't, if we did get back to face-to-face events as another sponsorship component, we have thought of scheduling in sessions or live demonstrations or whatever. And again, that would become another financial potential for WIOA, because the return for the investment is that we'd be promoting that to the people who would be attending. We're really conscious, though, of ensuring that every exhibitor has equal opportunity to access the delegates. So we really need to be conscious of when that is, those sorts of sessions may run. But yeah, anything is on the table. So thanks for the question.
Thank you.
I'll open the floor up to any other comments. Or
what about events outside of the conference, like doing a similar sort of exercise, but maybe online rather than live at the conference, but using a corporate member and their products or services, where you would promote it, and maybe you might have a small fee for someone to attend, and we just are providing the content, really.
Yeah, look, George mentioned that one of the thoughts was like that, a pay-per-view webinar. So it is a sponsored webinar that WIOA can then promote. And we would obviously look at what does that business model look like, both for the exhibiting company, so whoever is putting on the showcase, and then you're basically using WIOA's network to be part of that audience. So whether it be whether the pay-per-view is free for WIOA members and that the actual presenters pick up the entire tab, or whether you actually look at trying to make it a pay-per-view for the actual people who are tuning in as well. History has shown us that people aren't paying to go and view much content anymore because there's that much out there. They're all Zoom fatigued. But that said, if the content is viable and good content, and then it is hosted, after the event, we often have been running our own WIOA talks, but we just don't have a secure environment to hide it away, because we see them as being a WIOA member service. However, in the environment where, if it was a sponsored thing, and John Morris Group ran a session on, I can't remember what it was you were going to do on
water samplers.
Water samplers. We can promote it. We schedule the hour session. We then record it. We host it on YouTube, or you can host it on YouTube, and we will put a link post the event for everybody and anybody to access. So yeah, all those things are in the mix. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Good. Thanks, Craig.
Are you looking at sort of trying to start up the interest days again in various states, or is that? I know they'd be restricted numbers, but is that something you're also looking at?
Well, again, George is probably the better position to answer, and I'll get him to add on. But different states and different, if you've got different appetites for access. So yeah, you're right. In some places I know that they don't do tours and that anymore. So an interest day might have to be something completely different. But yeah, again, it's up to the appetite of both, what is the interest day, where is it, and people's appetite to attend. But again, that is varies across the state. But again, yeah, that could be something. We talk about hosted events. To me, that's what a hosted event would be.
Yeah,
George, you want to add?
Yeah, so just a couple of things on that. Queensland seems to be the only state that we've been able to run any events in the last 2 years, and in fact, we've been able to do a couple of bowls days. We had a charity interest day up in Cairns last week, but again, unfortunately, none of our staff could go. But I know Zach was there. I'm just looking who was online, but a number of our own members literally ran the day on our behalf, and that was like a technical day, as well as a bowls afternoon attached to it. But we had a South Australian meeting, for example, yesterday, and we've already penciled in an interest day at the Happy Valley water treatment plant for March next year. So it's going to determine, or going to be determined by the COVID situation and how quickly that changes. And then I'm sure it is part of our desire from the advisory committees to actually get back to doing those face-to-face things, particularly with a tour of facilities. There's lots and lots of new plants and things that have been opened recently. So we've got lots of suggestions about where we can go. It's just that we haven't been able to go there because, as Craig said, we've either been locked out from within a state, or the response from the water utilities is that they don't want non-essential operational staff actually going to the facilities at the current time, because that's how they're managing their COVID risk to their own people. So we're hoping that that's going to change, again, driven around the vaccination rates and all of the other things that are changing in our whole world anyway. And we're hoping that these are going to come back for 2022. I can tell you, Greg, I've been talking to John Mills from Toowoomba Regional Council as well, and Cole Haynes from our Queensland committee has been talking to John. They are talking about doing something at the Peachy water treatment plant literally before Christmas. So, but I would imagine that that's obviously in Queensland, but there won't be anything I wouldn't imagine in any of the other states before early 2022. I think there's just too much risk attached to all of that. So
yeah, understand.
So we have historically also conducted interest days where they're not necessarily at a treatment facility. So I know we had one with Zach again at the Aquatech Max one. We did one in Pumps out of Queensland, can't remember who it was.
Yeah.
And we've had a session at Xylem Pumps, for example. So that would be the other side of the coin, where if the tour idea of the water facilities is not able, maybe it is the sponsored arrangement that the host is the actual host of the venue. So you've got to have a venue, but then the challenge is to who is going to attend, is the appetite for the operation and their businesses there to send the people. So they're all the challenges that we face. But yeah, the idea of actually having a prominent day somewhere, if you've got a training room and a warehouse or something that you can do a demonstrations and see that as being viable, there again we're saying nothing's off limits.
Yeah. No, we find those sort of fairly beneficial,
Yeah.
So hopefully they can sort of gradually kick off and see how they sort of pan out as the vaccination rates get higher and higher, and people get a bit more comfortable with face-to-face meetings.
Yep.
Yeah. Just the past model on those as well. We have literally always given at least one corporate member the opportunity to be engaged on that particular day, usually through a speaking spot, and in return we've sort of hit them up to pay for the lunch for the operators for the day. So it's usually somewhere in that sort of $300 to $500 to for that privilege, if you like. But maybe that could be a different model that we could look at about how we did that, or whether we might be able to dual share it with a couple of organisations. And at the end of the day, if we spend the rest of our life covering costs at all those events, then literally WIOA makes nothing out of any of them. We floated the idea, and we had obviously the first time anyone here has heard about the potential for 2 Bendigos in 2022. Can I maybe throw it to the floor? What would you think about that, given that you're the potential sponsors and or exhibitors at the event? How would you feel about that?
In the same financial year?
No, in different. So they'd be one in March and one in October.
As long as you get a big crowd, mate, we'll attend anywhere like that. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Paul. Steve?
I think we'd struggle to do 2, a number of reasons. On the budgetary front, we actually use a UK And now actually we've moved again, we're in transition to a calendar year. So budgetary, it would be an issue, but as Paul said, really it comes down to can the feet get into the premises? So if it's the right people and enough of them, we'll find the money to do an event.
I think we're really conscious of it as well. Like we're conscious of not just trying to go to the well and, you know, have an exhibition with no people attending. So the mix would need to be appropriate and provide that return as well. But yeah, thanks, Steve.
Why does it have to be Bendigo? Is there other regional areas in Victoria you could attend rather than?
Thanks, Paul. That's a really good comment, because yeah, we have again floated. Could we run smaller, more focused events at smaller venues and have a completely different costing model? You know, but again, the Bendigo event is clearly, you know, our biggest, our most profitable, etc. All of those things that have historically enabled us to do a lot of the other things like the interest days purely on a cost recovery. So you're right, is that if the big events is not the, you know, there's no appetite, or it's, you know, people are scared to be going in big numbers, well then are smaller, you know, probably more costly events for the numbers, the ratio number, but is it, you know, is it a potential hybrid event? So do we have a smaller specialist type event in a hybrid environment, knowing that the actual people in attendance physically may be a lot less, but there could potentially be a virtual audience at the same time. So yeah, all those things are considerations, and our challenge is trying to find, you know, we're guessing, you know, like everybody, we don't know what the COVID situations are going to be, and we're just responding to what hits us. So yeah, all of those things are potentially opportunities where we could run, you know, we have had a dedicated safety event in Melbourne where we had, I think, 18 suppliers, and we had just a single day, and we'd get in the afternoon before and we'd be out that afternoon of the day. You know, that model seemed to work for that. It wasn't hugely profitable, but it was targeted, and we'd have 150 people attend. But they were successful. They were, you know, they're not running at a loss, and the exhibitors are getting access to dedicated people for that subject matter.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
So I just thought, Zach, and just maybe an extension to that answer as well, is that the Bendigo facility is really the only one in regional Victoria that's kind of got that size and scope to be able to run the event that we know it. And we have sort of, as Craig said, we have talked about, if we ran the big event, well, do we run something, you know, smaller, and we don't go to Bendigo, we go somewhere totally different. We go, as, and Zach's even chucked a note in the chat there, why don't we, could we go to Melbourne and do something there? And that's kind of what we're looking at, is as part of an alternative sort of model as well. So rather than two Bendigos, could we do the safety one, or could we make a technology one, or could we do something different? And we, you know, well mindful there's lots of other associations out there as well. There's the Instrumentation Association that I know sort of run tabletop style conferences right around the state or around the country in various states that I think it's the IICA. I reckon Adam and you, Paul, would probably be aware of them as well. So the difficulty for us is that we end up sort of, if we move into that sort of track, then we end up in competition with them, but then we also potentially burn the Bendigo conference as well. So because if people have been to a specific conference, they may not want to go to the Bendigo version because they've been. So yeah. And as Craig said, economies of scale, like you can well imagine, as well, the more smaller events still take just as much, and believe it or not, at sometimes more organising than the big one in Bendigo, because you know, we've had a relationship there with the suppliers, the caterers, the you know, all of the people that provide the AV. You picture everything that happens over there. It's just a case of ringing up every year and saying, right, we're on again, give us a new quote. Wherever we go, whenever we go there, we've got to start from scratch. And we've literally got, well, now back to 4 staff So it's a pretty big chore to try and run all of these things all of the time. And the more events that we actually get, the harder that becomes.
Yeah, the final point, and again, if there's no further questions, I'll make this. The final point is we also had to, given the COVID plans that are implemented, it reduces the number of exhibitors that we can have, even at a 2 metre per square person. So those things are all those considerations which are clearly having an impact on the financial position of WIOA. We are looking at other ways that we can potentially look at generating income, providing services to our members, our corporates, and as we mentioned, nothing's off the tables. Thank you for your attendance, much appreciated.